Meaning of life, not what 99% think. Buddha's answer. However much the modern world may pride itself on its triumphs over the follies and foibles of the past, it appears that the progress we credit ourselves with has been bought at a price so steep as to throw into question the worth of our achievements. This price has been nothing less than the shared conviction that our lives are endowed with ultimate meaning. Though in earlier ages men and women lived in a space populated largely by figments of the collective imagination, they could still claim a precious asset that we sorely lack: a firm and buoyant belief that their everyday lives were encompassed by a penumbra of enduring significance stemming from their relation to a transcendent goal. Present-day attitudes, however, molded by scientific reductionism and technocratic audacity, have combined forces to sweep away from our minds even the faint suspicion that our lives may possess any deeper meaning than material prosperity and technological innovation. For an increasing number of people today, the consequence of this militancy has been a pervasive sense of meaninglessness. Cut loose from our moorings in a living spiritual tradition, we find ourselves adrift on a sea of confusion where all values seem arbitrary and relative. We float aimlessly along the waves of caprice, without any supreme purpose to serve as the pole star for our ideals, as the wellspring for inspired thought and action. The quest for meaning. But just as little as nature can tolerate a vacuum, so humankind can little tolerate a complete loss of meaning. Thence, to escape the plunge into the abyss of meaninglessness, we grasp after flotsam, attempting to immerse ourselves in distractions. We pursue pleasure and power, seek to augment our wealth and status, surround ourselves with contraptions, invest our hopes in personal relationships that only conceal our own inner poverty. At the same time, however, that our absorption in distractions helps us to cope with the psychological void, it also stifles in us a deeper and still more insistent need, the longing for a peace and freedom that does not depend upon external contingencies. One of the great blessings of the Buddha's teaching is the remedy it can offer for the problem of meaninglessness so widespread in human life today. The Dhamma can serve as a source of meaning primarily because it provides us with the two requisites of a meaningful life: an ultimate goal for which to live, and a clear-cut but flexible set of instructions by which we can advance toward that goal from whatever station in life we start from. In the Buddha's teaching, the quest for ultimate meaning does not begin, as in the theistic religions, with propositions about a supernatural scheme of salvation to be assented to in faith. It begins, rather, by focusing upon an experiential problem right at the crux of human existence. The problem, of course, is the problem of suffering, the boundaries of which are shown to extend beyond our immediate subjection to pain, misery, and sorrow, and to encompass all that is conditioned precisely because of its impermanence, its vulnerability, its lack of abiding substance. The goal of the teaching, the unconditioned element which is Nibbāna, then comes to have a decisive bearing upon our vital concerns because it is apprehended as the cessation of suffering. Though in its own nature it defies all the limiting categories of conceptual thought, as the cessation of suffering, Nibbāna provides the final answer to our innermost yearnings for an imperishable peace, for complete freedom from sorrow, anxiety, and distress. The way that the quest for this goal intersects with the course of our everyday life is made plain by the Buddha's analysis of the cause of suffering. The cause of suffering, the Buddha holds, lies within ourself, in our selfish craving conjoined with blinding ignorance, in the three evil roots that taint our normal engagement with the world: greed, hate, and delusion. Thence, the freedom from suffering that we seek lies in the eradication of these three roots. To orient our life toward the goal of deliverance from suffering requires that we tread the path that leads to and merges with the goal. This path is the Noble Eightfold Path, which brings an end to suffering and bondage by enabling us to extricate the causes of suffering embedded in our hearts. We begin the path exactly where we are, in the midst of error and defilement, and by clarifying our views, transforming our attitudes, and purifying our minds, we advance by stages toward the direct realization of the ultimate good. If the goal toward which the path points lies beyond the pale of conditioned existence, to walk the Eightfold Path is to discover within the confines of conditioned existence dimensions of meaning previously unknown. This richness of meaning stems from a twofold source. One is the recognition that the following of the path brings a diminishment of suffering for ourselves as well as others, and at the same time an enhancement of joy, mental equipoise, and peace. The other source of meaning is the conviction that the values we are pursuing are not merely subjective and arbitrary, but are grounded in an absolutely objective order in the very nature of things. As we embark on the way to the end of suffering, the final goal no longer appears merely as a distant shore, but becomes refracted in our experience as the challenge of overcoming the unwholesome roots and of assisting our fellow beings to do the same. This challenge, the task of actualizing our own good and the good of others, becomes at the same time life's inner core of meaning, to transmute greed into generosity and relinquishment, to replace hate with love and compassion, and to dispel delusion with the light of liberative wisdom. Giving meaning to life. There are passages in the text where the Buddha gives a pretty bleak picture of life and the world at large, like that chant just now. The world just passes away. There is no one in charge. It's a slave to craving. In other words, there is no grand design to give meaning to life or the world. Things are simply driven by blind craving. There is another passage where the Buddha talks about the way beings wander on in this world. It's like throwing a stick up into the air. Sometimes it lands on this end. Sometimes it lands on that end. Sometimes it lands splat in the middle. No real pattern, no real direction. This doesn't mean that life is hopeless, but it means simply that life doesn't have a meaning unless you give it a meaning. So that's the real question. It's not what is the meaning of life, the question is, what kind of meaning do you want to give to it? This is where the practice comes in, because the practice gives direction. You want to understand the mind so you can understand why it is that even though everything we do is aimed at producing happiness, we often end up causing suffering, pain, and disappointment instead. Why is that? And as the Buddha pointed out, it's within our power to learn, to understand why. That quest to learn and to understand is what gives meaning to life, gives direction to life in a way that nothing else can. You look at the things that people try to accomplish in life, in the world outside. The world seems designed to just grind everything down. You want this kind of relationship, but the relationship just falls apart. You want to develop a nice, strong body. Well, it gets strong for a while, then it starts getting sick, then it gets old, and you're left with nothing. You want to accomplish something large in the world, but then the economy collapses. War comes. Famine comes. All kinds of things can happen. So looking to the world for meaning is a frustrating, very frustrating experience. But when you look inside for meaning, you find that there is a lot to learn, there is a lot to understand. Things do get accomplished. As you work on the path, you begin to see how the mind creates a thought world, and you realize that you have the choice to go into that thought world or not. As you develop more and more mindfulness, more and more alertness, you understand these processes of the mind. Through understanding them, you can free yourself from them. You don't have to be their slave. the world that's a slave to craving. You don't have to get into that world. As the Buddha said, the process of learning about these things is not accompanied by disappointment and sorrow. It's accompanied by joy, a sense of release that comes when you realize that you've been doing something really stupid for a long, long time, and now you've seen through it. You've understood it. You've gone beyond it. You really can cut through and free yourself from the defilements of the mind. When the path comes together in the mind, you see on the one hand that there is such a thing as the deathless, and on the other hand that you've attained it through mastering your own intentions, understanding the process of the mind. There is more to experience than simply the conditioned and fabricated things we normally experience. That right there cuts through a lot of fetters. It's like cutting off your arm, which may not be a pretty idea, but once the arm is cut off, it's off. And even though the doctors may try to sew it back on, it's never quite the same. There is such a thing as a permanent change. And even without getting to the noble attainments, you find that having more mastery and more understanding over the processes of the mind puts you in a much better position. You understand yourself better. You cause less suffering for yourself. You understand other people better and cause them less suffering as well. So this is a project that's really worth giving your life to, and it gives meaning to your life. It gives a direction to your life. You develop a new relationship to yourself. Ultimately, you get to the point where you don't need a sense of identity, but in the meantime, you develop a skillful sense. There is a sense of self-esteem that comes with knowing that you can learn. No matter how old you are, no matter how little or how much time is left to your life, you can still learn. The issue came up a while back. People who are really driven to accomplish things, really driven to develop a sense of self around their accomplishments, are noticing that that causes a lot of stress, a lot of pain and anxiety. But the answer is not to have no accomplishments or to have no desire for accomplishments. The answer lies first in really getting a strong sense of what is a genuine accomplishment in life, and second, gaining a skillful sense of yourself around the process of trying to attain that accomplishment. What this comes down to is two things. The first is having a willingness to learn. If that's where your sense of identity, your self-esteem is focused, it's skillful. Gain the ability to look at something you've done and realize that there may be something wrong here, but that doesn't have to threaten your identity. It just calls forth your desire to learn more about what did you do wrong, why was it wrong, what could you do in the future not to repeat that mistake. A second aspect of this more skillful sense of self is a sense of self that understands what's an important question, what's an issue that's worth pursuing, and what are the issues you don't really have to pursue. Here again, the practice gives you a good, strong direction. Any issue related to why there is suffering and what you can do to put an end to it, that's an important issue. You hear about people who are suddenly told by their doctors they have, say, 3 months or 3 weeks to live, and they suddenly develop a very strong sense of what they really want out of the remainder of their life. They clear away all the distractions and focus on what's really important. And it's good that they do that, but it's sad that they had to wait for a death sentence before they do. We have to remember we are all here with a death sentence. It's simply that we don't have the days marked out for us, how much longer it's going to be. But we do know that we have a limited amount of time, yet we tend to forget that. We act as if we didn't know. So keep that in mind. Death is down the line. Maybe even before death, illness will come and make it more and more difficult to practice. So the question is, what are the really important things you want to take care of while you've still got the chance? This is the big issue. Looking at your own actions to see where they cause suffering and stress, and to figure out how you can act in a way that doesn't. And the skills you learn in the process of focusing on that important issue will serve you in good stead all the way through aging, all the way through illness, and all the way through death. The ability to keep your mind focused on what's important and to put aside unimportant things. The willingness to learn all the time. Those abilities will always serve you in good stead. So this is how we give meaning to life. Finding an issue that gives direction and focuses on the really important problems in life, that has the potential to take us to some place where real changes can be made, changes that make a true difference. It's one of the reasons why Dharma practice is something you really can give your life to, because it gives meaning back to your life. Giving dignity to life. To ask what it means to live with dignity may sound strange in an age like our own, when our frantic struggle to make ends meet hardly allows us the leisure to ponder such weighty matters. But if we do pause a moment to give this question a little thought, we would realize soon enough that it is not merely the idle musing of someone with too much time on his hands. The question not only touches on the very meaning of our lives, but goes even beyond our personal quest for meaning to bore into the very springs of contemporary culture. For if it isn't possible to live with dignity, then life has no transcendent purpose. And in such a case, our only aim in the brief time allotted to us should be to snatch whatever thrills we can before the lights go off for good. But if we can give sense to the idea of living with dignity, then we need to consider whether we are actually ordering our lives in the way we should, and, even more broadly, whether our culture encourages a dignified lifestyle. Though the idea of dignity seems simple enough at first sight, it is actually fairly complex. My Webster's Collegiate Dictionary, 1936, defines dignity as elevation of character, intrinsic worth, excellence, nobleness of manner, aspect, or style. My Roget's Thesaurus, 1977, groups it with prestige, esteem, repute, honor, glory, renown, fame. Evidence that over the last 40 years the word's epicenter of meaning has undergone a shift. When we inquire about living with dignity, our focus should be on the word's older nuance. What I have in mind is living with the conviction that one's life has intrinsic worth, that we possess a potential for moral excellence that resonates with the rhythm of the seasons and the silent hymn of the galaxies. The conscious pursuit of dignity does not enjoy much popularity these days, having been crowded out by such stiff competitors as wealth and power, success and fame. Behind this devaluation of dignity lies a series of developments in Western thought that emerged in reaction to the dogmatic certainties of Christian theology. The Darwinian theory of evolution, Freud's thesis of the ID, economic determinism, the computer model of the mind. All these trends, arisen more or less independently, have worked together to undermine the notion that our lives have any more worth than the value of our bank accounts. When so many self-assured voices speak to the contrary, we no longer feel justified in viewing ourselves as the crowning glory of creation. Instead, we have become convinced we are nothing but packets of protoplasm governed by selfish genes, clever monkeys with college degrees, and business cards plying across highways rather than trees. Such ideas, in however distorted a form, have seeped down from the halls of academia into popular culture, eroding our sense of human dignity on many fronts. The free market economy, the taskmaster of the modern social order, leads the way. For this system, the primary form of human interaction is the investment and the sale, with people themselves reckoned simply as producers and consumers, sometimes even as commodities. Our vast impersonal democracies reduce the individual to a nameless face in the crowd, to be manipulated by slogans, images, and promises into voting this way or that. Cities have expanded into sprawling urban jungles, dirty and dangerous, whose dazed occupants seek an easy escape with the help of drugs and loveless sex. escalation in crime, political corruption, upheavals in family life, the despoliation of the environment. These all speak to us as much of a deterioration in how we regard ourselves as in how we relate to others. Amidst these pangs of forlorn hope, can the Dhamma help us recover our lost sense of dignity and thereby give new meaning to our lives? The answer to this question is yes, and in two ways. First, by justifying our claim to innate dignity, and second, by showing us what we must do to actualize our potential dignity. For Buddhism, the innate dignity of human beings does not stem from our relationship to an almighty God or our endowment with an immortal soul. It stems, rather, from the exalted place of human life in the broad expanse of sentient existence. Far from reducing human beings to children of chance, the Buddha teaches that the human realm is a very special realm standing squarely at the spiritual center of the cosmos. What makes human life so special is that human beings have a capacity for moral choice that is not shared by other types of beings. Though this capacity is inevitably subject to limiting conditions, we always possess, in the immediate present, a margin of inner freedom that allows us to change ourselves and hereby to change the world. But life in the human realm is far from cozy. To the contrary, it is inconceivably difficult and complex, rife with conflicts and moral ambiguities, offering enormous potential for both good and evil. This moral complexity can make of human life a painful struggle indeed, but it also renders the human realm the most fertile ground for sowing the seeds of enlightenment. It is at this tauntingly ambiguous crossroads in the long journey of being that we can either rise to the heights of spiritual greatness or fall to degrading depths. The two alternatives branch out from each present moment, and which one we take depends on ourselves. While this unique capacity for moral choice and spiritual awakening confers intrinsic dignity on human life, the Buddha does not emphasize this so much as he does our ability to acquire active dignity. This ability is summed up by a word that lends its flavor to the entire teaching, Ariya or noble. The Buddha's teaching is the Ariyadhamma, the noble doctrine, and its purpose is to change human beings from ignorant worldlings into noble disciples resplendent with noble wisdom. The change does not come about through mere faith and devotion, but by treading the Buddhist path, which transmutes our frailties into invincible strengths and our ignorance into knowledge. The notion of acquired dignity is closely connected with the idea of autonomy. Autonomy means self-control and self-mastery, freedom from the sway of passion and prejudice, the ability to actively determine oneself. To live with dignity means to be one's own master, to conduct one's affairs on the basis of one's own free choices instead of being pushed around by forces beyond one's control. The autonomous individual draws his or her strength from within, free from the dictates of craving and bias, guided by a thirst for righteousness and an inner perception of truth. The person who represents the apex of dignity for Buddhism is the arahant, the liberated one, who has reached the pinnacle of spiritual autonomy, released from the dictates of greed, hatred, and delusion. The very word arahant suggests this sense of dignity. The word means worthy one who deserves the offerings of gods and humans. Although in our present condition we might still be far from the stature of an arahant, this does not mean we are utterly lost, for the means of reaching the highest goal is already within our reach. The means is the Noble Eightfold Path with its twin pillars of right view and right conduct. Right view is the first factor of the path and the guide for all the others. To live with right view is to see that our decisions count, that our volitional actions have consequences that extend beyond themselves and conduce to our long-term happiness or suffering. The active counterpart of right view is right conduct, action guided by the ideal of moral and spiritual excellence. Right conduct in body, speech, and mind brings to fulfillment the other 7 factors of the Eightfold Path, culminating in true knowledge and deliverance. In today's hectic world, humankind is veering recklessly in 2 destructive directions. One is the path of violent struggle and confrontation, the other that of frivolous self-indulgence. Beneath their apparent contrasts, what unites these 2 extremes is a shared disregard for human dignity. The former violates the dignity of other people, the latter undermines one's own dignity. The Buddha's Noble Eightfold Path is a middle way that avoids all harmful extremes. To follow this path not only brings a quiet dignity into one's own life, but also answers the cynicism of our age with a note of wholesome affirmation. What do you really want out of life? And how do you go about it? When you sit down to meditate, you want to make a determination that you're going to stay here with the breath, that you're going to want to stay with the breath. Then do everything that you can do to keep that desire alive and to act on it wisely. In other words, focus on the causes, what's going to help you stay here, and keep reminding yourself, come back, when the mind wanders off. When you focus on the causes, the results will come. If you sit here simply hoping for the results, but without doing the causes, without wanting the causes, it's not going to happen. Everything is rooted in desire. The problem is, we have so many desires, and they pull in so many different directions. This is why we have to make a determination to put our desires in order. This holds true not only for meditation sessions, but for life as a whole. You look at a lot of people's lives and they're like dust motes in the air. When the sun shines through, you see the motes moving back and forth, up and down, here and there, not going any place in particular. A lot of people's desires are like that, pulled a little bit here, then a little bit there, and nothing gets accomplished. This is why determination is one of the perfections that lead to awakening. You try to put your desires in order. Decide which ones you're going to go with and which ones you're going to have to put aside. But before you make a determination, you have to stop and think, what do you really want out of life? And how do you go about it? This is why the first quality of a good determination is discernment, figuring out what is a really worthwhile thing to aspire to. And why another quality of a good determination is stilling and peace. In other words, you want to aim at something that, once it's attained, will bring real peace to the mind. This is where you have to bring your heart and your head together. In other words, thinking about what would be worthwhile, but also asking yourself, what do you really want? And how do you train your heart so that it's in line what you really want? When the Buddha talks about wisdom or discernment, it's a combination of right view and goodwill. Right view is understanding about how cause and effect work, what has to be done in order to gain what effect. But discernment also requires thoughts of goodwill, thinking about true happiness. What would truly make you happy, and what kind of happiness will last? One thing you have to think about is other people's happiness, because if your happiness runs roughshod over theirs, they're not going to stand for it. They're going to do everything they can to destroy whatever happiness you're looking for. So you want a happiness that's harmless, that's in line with the true happiness of everybody else. Fortunately, a happiness that comes from within, as when we're meditating, doesn't harm anybody. All the forms of goodness, generosity, virtue, meditation are totally harmless, and they're based on goodwill. With generosity and virtue, that's easy to see. When you give to others, they're happy. When you abstain from harming them, they're happy. But especially meditation, getting the mind under control so that your greed, aversion, and delusion don't take over. That's a gift, not only to yourself, but to the people around you. So when you think about the goals you want to aim at, It's good to think about looking for a harmless goal, a happiness that's harmless. As for the search for happiness, there's nothing wrong with it. Years back, I was asked to give a talk at a college on the Buddhist view about happiness. And the afternoon before I gave the talk, I happened to visit an old college professor of mine who was living in a retirement home nearby. He had taught Christian ethics. He asked me what I was going to be talking about that evening, and I said, how the pursuit of happiness doesn't have to be hedonistic. He said, "Gee, I wish I could listen to that talk." Because for a lot of people, that's what the pursuit of happiness is, hedonistic. When you look for your happiness, all you think about is what your pleasures are going to be. But the Buddha said that genuine happiness requires that you think about the happiness of others, that you think about the consequences of your actions. And as you pursue true happiness, you develop good qualities, discernment, compassion, and purity. These are the qualities of the Buddha, and they're qualities we can develop within ourselves. We have this potential. These are very noble qualities. Some people find it strange that they would be developed by taking your search for happiness seriously, but that's precisely how it happens, how they get developed. Here I mean seriously, not in the sense of being grim, but seriously in the sense that you really think it through. The wisdom comes in choosing a good goal, something that really will bring peace to the mind. The compassion comes again in choosing a goal that's totally harmless. And then the purity comes in how you carry out the determination. The Buddha points out two qualities that are especially important. One is truth. You really stick with what you see is right. And if it turns out it's not right, then you make adjustments. But this quality of truthfulness is what will carry you through, because you're going to come up with a lot of conflicting desires. You seem to notice them even more when you start to meditate, because when you don't have a particular desire in mind, or you allow the mind to wander among its desires, it's like a boat floating in a river with different currents coming in from different directions. You're not really sure which current is pushing the boat which way because there's nothing solid to compare things with. But when you put down an anchor, you can see very carefully, okay, now the boat is being pushed to the right. Now it's being pushed to the left. In the same way, once you've made up your mind on something that's really worthwhile, there will be pushings coming from different sides, and you have to maintain this quality of truthfulness. That's going to require the other quality essential to a good determination, which is relinquishment. There are going to be things you have to give up. It's like winning at chess. If you're not willing to lose some of your pieces, you're not going to win. You have to decide which pieces are expendable, which things in your life, and sometime there'll be things you want very much, to which you have to learn how to say no. There's a principle in one of the verses of the Dhammapada where the Buddha says, if you see a greater happiness that comes from abandoning a lesser happiness, the wise person is willing to forsake the lesser happiness for the sake of the greater one. There's a translation of the Dhammapada where the translator gave a footnote to this verse, saying that this could not possibly be the meaning of this verse because it seems so obvious. Well, it's obvious in the abstract, but carrying it through requires truthfulness and the willingness to relinquish what gets in the way of what you really want deep down inside. Those qualities don't necessarily come easily. All too often we want to win at chess and keep all our pieces. But we have to realize if you want something really important in life, there are a lot of things you'll have to say no to. So these qualities of truthfulness and relinquishment help you develop your purity. For the Buddha, purity means 1. Having pure intentions, and then 2. Actually carrying them out in a way that's harmless. In his instructions to his son, when the son was 7 years old, he said, "This is how you make your actions pure." Before you act, you ask yourself, what are the consequences you think will come as a result of these actions that you're planning to do? And if you see there's going to be any harm, you don't do it. If you don't foresee any harm, you can go ahead. While you're doing the action, you look at the results that are coming up, because sometimes the results come right away. You don't have to wait until your next lifetime. Say, you stick your finger in a fire. It's not going to hurt in the next lifetime. It's going to hurt now. If you see something coming up right away that's harmful, you stop. If you see nothing harmful, go ahead with the action until you're done. And then when you're done, you reflect on the long term. If you see that there was a mistake that did cause harm, you go and talk it over with someone who's more advanced on the path. Learn from that person's wisdom so that you're not reinventing the Dharma wheel all the time, and then keep on training. If you don't see any harm, take joy in the fact that your practice is advancing, and continue to practice in skillful qualities day and night. That was his instruction to his son. That's how we find purity. In other words, we don't simply go on good intentions. We try to go on skillful intentions, and that means we have to train them. And this is how you train them, by acting on what you think is the best intention. If it's not good enough, well, you've learned something, and you try to apply what you've learned the next time around. That's how your intentions become better. You try to bring discernment to your choice of a goal, trying to choose a goal that's going to put the mind at peace. And then you're true in carrying out what you see as the most discerning path, and true in relinquishing whatever gets in the way. This is how you attain what you aspire to. This is how your determination becomes successful. So, you look at your life. What do you want out of it? You get to choose. There may be some limitations coming in from past karma, but there's a range of skillful choices open to you. The wise person wants to find something really solid and not be pushed around by random desires, but have a clear sense of priorities in what's really important in life and what's not. Then you try to develop the strength, the truthfulness, that allow you to carry through with that discernment. This is how the Buddha gained awakening. This is how every good determination manages to succeed.